I'm going to do the formal one first, okay? And then we'll do just kind of the important.
They don't need to be formal.
Yes, I know, but we got to do it.
All right.
Okay.
You do you.
Dr. Ryan Bentley is a board-certified family medicine physician and board-certified chiropractic physician. He's a former collegiate athlete. What was the sport?
Football.
Football.
I had a 5'8" Hobbit. It was amazing.
Yes, exactly. And
First Hobbit to play football.
Hobbit, yes, they're the Hobbit team. We're both on the Hobbit team, actually.
Yes.
And has degrees as a chiropractor, a medical doctor, and a PhD. He's been going to school forever. Currently runs an integrated practice, which this place is phenomenal. When I walked in here a year and a half ago, I could not believe this place. Vitalis Health out of Holland, Michigan, working with a broad base of clients from professional athletes to aging populations, children, and newborn babies. In addition to his daily practice, Dr. Bentley has written 2 books, which I highly recommend: Vessels That Thrive, Choosing a Lifestyle of Health, Healing, and Faith, and Sex, Lies, and Cholesterol. Well, that sounds interesting. Which are being praised by practitioners and everyday readers alike. He's also a clinical assistant professor at the Western Michigan University Medical School, where he works with third-year medical students. He diligently researches the best and most cutting-edge treatments. It's crazy what's going on in his practice to help the body and heal and regenerate for optimal functioning. Dr. Bentley's goal is to create tools and resources to educate patients and physicians to construct objective, quantifiable systems and protocols to achieve optimal health. At his practice, he uses red light therapy, hyperbaric chambers, therapeutic plasma exchange, IV, and nutrition therapy, and much more. He's also an avid user of the Inner Armor program and has been training with the same program used by LU Med students and athletes for the past year. So that's the formal one. I'll tell you the informal one. When I first met Dr. Bentley, I just was blown away by his knowledge. What he can do with a set of normal labs that normally you go in and go through in about 5-10 minutes with your doc. Hey, everything's good. I brought in my labs once to him. It was like an hour later, all the stuff that he is able just to unpack and the knowledge base that's here. And as I started to work with him, I did something that I've never really done, is I connected him with some really key people that's been a part of our history. So somebody who's a very high-level NFL coach that I normally don't bring people to him. We sent Dr. Bentley across the country to go work with this coach. That relationship has taken off with that organization. And then also an NFL quarterback that I work with that took years and years to build that. The type of confidence that I would have to introduce somebody, and you guys kind of know what that's like, right? You know, that hey, wait a minute, my reputation's kind of on the line, and I've built this reputation over years. You get that? That you don't just do that with anybody. And I have felt unbelievably confident, and what he's done with those people is just amazing. So I'm just so excited that you get an opportunity to hear from Dr. Bentley today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm just trying to figure out, how do I get it where I can actually see my next slide? Anybody know how to do that on a Mac?
I don't know on that.
Presenter, let me go back to, I apologize, I had this. No. Well, we'll just do that. All right. Anyways, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm a pretty informal guy, so I'm very blessed to be here and very thankful. So I just wanted to kind of share with you that you guys are all part of the athletic team here, and you have the ability to touch lives in a way that other people don't. That you get to work with people when they're injured. You get to work with people when they want to prevent injury. You get to help them reach some of their dreams and their aspirations and hear them when you're working with them, because what you guys do is hands-on and you're next to people, and you can't ever discount the relationship that you develop with someone by just being a person, by loving and caring for them and having that compassion. And that was demonstrated most recently. A patient of ours, as Dr. Royer said, everything, My oldest patient in the office right now is 94. My youngest is a newborn. I see everything from NFL athletes to people that are high executives that fly in their own plane to Amish people that come in with a driver. And everything in between. People that are healthy and well that want to maintain healthy and well to people that are stage 4 cancers and looking for possible answers of how to help them bridge this phase of life. And just seeing my oldest son is a medical assistant in my office on Thursdays. He's pre-med. He applies this coming fall. I believe he's actually applying here as well, or applies this spring for the following year. But the gentleman walked up and just said, I just wanted to say thank you for your compassion that you shared with my wife as she was in this stage of life. And it was just very impactful for him. For me, it's, I've been in the game for a while, so to speak, that it's, you just don't, it doesn't really hit you, but it hit him in that moment because to me, it's part of life. It's part of who you are. And just, my son said, I'd never really realized that impact of just having that moment with that person. So don't ever discount that. And that's the most important thing above everything that we do. So when it comes to optimizing performance and injury prevention and heart rate variability, it's a science that is definitely there that you can't argue with it. And it's a pretty cool thing, but I don't want to, my time here is really for you. And so with that, I kind of want to share my story and how I got into this a little bit. And then I didn't really prepare anything until, I knew what I wanted to kind of talk about and different things, but I put the presentation together on the plane last night. I don't know, I might get through 3 slides. I might get through all of them. I might not even use any of them. My time here is for you all, and I'm happy to answer questions, so feel free to raise a hand, ask something pops up in your mind, we'll go from there. But I was thinking about it, and the best athletes aren't the fastest, they aren't the strongest. Some of the people that I've been able to work with aren't the people that can bench press 500 pounds, that they're just the strongest, they could run their head into a wall and not feel any pain because they can block that aspect of it. But they're the ones that are the most adaptable, the people that can handle stressors, the people that can feel that pressure but yet be able to control their nervous system to optimize their performance. So the people that are sitting there and game's on the line and they're on the sideline just kind of chilling, relaxing, people are like, oh, they don't care. No, what they're doing is they're conserving their energy. They're smart. They're just not out there just grinding away. I remember when I was being recruited for football, so ultimately ended up playing at University of Evansville, which is a 1AA team. Played there for 2 years, and then I learned that they're going to get rid of the program my senior year. So then I decided to take my athletic competitiveness and become a nerd and transferred to Indiana University so I can get rid of my social life and just go into hiding. And as my wife said, I successfully became the nerd that I was sought after to be. But with that, I remember going to Illinois State, and they were playing Washburn. I remember walking through the hotel room and just seeing this guy. Now, the game time's not till like 2 or 3 o'clock, right? And it's 11 o'clock in the morning, and this guy is sitting there on his bed, headphones, chewing his mouth. That guy, his adrenals are going to burn out by the time he gets to the game, right? And he's a middle linebacker, and so if you got to pump yourself up that much and take stimulants and all these different things and coffee to get you ready for a game, you might already have a problem. And you can assess those types of things with heart rate variability and looking at that. I don't know why this is doing that, but anyways. So if you can control your nervous system, you can control your performance. That's the bottom line. And you guys get to have the ability to help your athletes do that. So ultimately, you all have gifts and skills. There'll be never be another Chris here, another Tim. And whatever your gifts and skills are, raise your standards. Don't just settle for what is and what you've been told you can do. You have to think outside the box. You guys have an incredible facility here. You guys have the opportunity to change things with regards to athletic performance and the things that you can do. And heart rate variability is just one aspect of that. But think about different protocols and things that you can come up with of how do we assess people so they have better recovery. And I always tell people, the easiest way to treat a disease is not get it, right? That's the easiest. So the best way to treat an injury is don't get it. So being proactive, but you have to convey that because these kids are young, and a lot of them have different upbringings. And again, they all come from a different background. And I tell people we all have a little bit of Jerry Springer in our life, you know. So it's everybody comes from a different area, and so keep that in mind. That raising your standard is about helping other people and serving the people that you get to be with on a daily basis. And so I challenge you to that. No matter where you are in your profession right now, continue to challenge yourself. So, who am I? I'm a man of faith. Ultimately, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, as it said. But when it comes to that, my journey has been nothing but faith. I remember 6 months left of med school. I was on my knees. I had $2.17 in the bank account, and I was crying, ready to quit. Called my wife. I said, I think I'm done. She's like, well, I'm going to pray. And she was 5 minutes away picking up the kids. And just after that, she gets home. I kid you not. This is God's honest truth. I was preaching at a church down in Tennessee. And this is probably, it was actually quite a few years, like 2 years prior to that. And my wife gets home from me calling her 5 minutes later, goes to the mailbox, comes in with tears in her eyes, and there was a check for $500 that said donation. And it was from the elder of the church that I had preached at. Just out of the blue. And at that point I said, all right, God, I'm all in. Whatever your path is, I'm all in. I'll just continue. So that's one aspect of who I am, first and foremost. I am a husband. I've been married for 25 years to my lovely wife, Tara. We have 3 amazing kids. So this is Abby. She's going to be our transplant. They get married June 14th. I get to officiate their wedding, which is pretty awesome. She's at Alma College. They're like 3 years in a row national champions in competitive cheer that she is captain of. She is going into social work, very likely. She was always speech pathology. This is Reese. He is my oldest son, works as my medical assistant, plays lacrosse at Hope College. Took his MCAT, did well, is applying to med schools. They're going to go to Colorado for a year. This is my lovely, amazing wife who has been with me on every step of this journey. This is my son Hayden, who I believe actually knows more about Star Wars than I know medical, about the human body. And so he is actually going to transfer from Hope College to DePauw University is the plan, and he will be a screenwriter, and I do believe he will carry on to Star Wars saga because someone's got to do it, so why not him? And then this is my daughter, Ella. She is 20. So he's 21. He is 18, and she is 20. She is a stylist, does cosmetology. She's a little entrepreneur. She wants to create an organic skincare line, hair care line, that type of thing. So that's my family. They're pretty amazing. We do have 2 cool dogs that are pretty fun. And then there is this. So what is this? So in light of Star Wars, I kind of look at this. This is my training. It's a dichotomy. I have chiropractic that I started off in, which chiropractic taught me what health and wellness and lifestyle was all about, and the unlimited healing capability of the human frame when you remove the deficiencies and toxicities and provide the body with what it needs. And then I have the opposite aspect, which was medicine, which taught me about disease and pathology, and what it's like to hold someone's hand as they pass away, how to talk to somebody about how to die with dignity, but at the same time, the beauty of bringing in 47 babies into the world. So there's a lot of beauty in that. And so my training are completely polar opposites here, right? And then you throw in the research piece, okay? So I never wanted to be a bench researcher, but I wanted to be a research-informed clinician. I wanted to be able to go through the weeds and actually look at this. So if anybody remember the Women's Health Initiative from 2002 about hormone replacement therapy in women and it causes cancer and heart disease? Yes. So here's the problem that got blasted all over the news. 25% increased risk of breast cancer. They stopped the study. So I was doing some of the validation studies at Indiana University when I had transferred there through the physiology department, and it was causing increased uterine weight, and I didn't really understand the scientific method and all that kind of stuff, and unopposed estrogens and why that causes increased uterine weights, all those types of things. But nonetheless, if you actually look at the study, what they said, if you look at the actual study, so in the placebo group, 4 out of 1,000 people got breast cancer. In the treatment group, 5 out of 1,000 people got breast cancer. It's a difference of 1 out of 1,000 people. That's not statistically relevant. But what they did is they made a relative statistic, and then they therefore said, oh, that's a difference of 1, and there was 4 people here. So roughly a 25% rise in breast cancer. That's what got blasted all over the news. So now here I am 20 years later seeing women. Hormones are not the issue. It's deficiency that's the issue. But I wanted to be able to understand, how can I look at research and look at this information, but still make it clinically applicable and cut through the BS? Because there's a lot out there. There's a lot of stuff out there. So with that said, it was funny, when I went through when I started going into medicine, this doctor looked at me and goes, well, that's really weird. I go, what's that? He goes, you're a chiropractor and became a medical doctor? I go, yeah. He goes, it's just weird. I go, wouldn't it be more weird if I was a medical doctor and became a chiropractor? He goes, good point. So what I find is that there are so many people that are in this in-between land. They're not sick and diseased yet, but they're not healthy and well. And we can't anti-age. It's the most ridiculous term I've ever heard. We're not going to anti-age. We're all going to age. But how do we age not just gracefully, but powerfully? That I can be the grandparent kicking the soccer ball with my grandkids and great-grandkids. I hope I'm Betty White, that I fall asleep one day and just go to sleep planning my 100-and-something birthday. You know, as long as I'm functional and adding to life, that's my goal, barring no traumas. But we're going to continue to have birthdays. So how do we turn that needle towards health and wellness as we continue to age? As opposed to sickness and disease and pathology, which is years of dysfunction that lead to disease and pathology. And so you go down that path. So oftentimes what would happen is like, oh, you saw the light. You finally realized that chiropractic's crap and you became a medical doctor. And then, you know, the chiropractic thought I went to the dark side, you know. And then, you know, but then, you know, the medical establishment thought I saw the light, you know, here I am. And vice versa. And so it's all about perspective and how you look at it. The way I look at it is, man, it would have been a lot faster if I would have just been a DO. I mean, you take a chiropractor and you add him to an MD, you got a DO, right? That would have been a much faster track, but that's not the path I took, and that's okay. So anyways, that's a little bit of who I am. So how does it get into inner armor? Well, I always look at the body on a physical, chemical, emotional level. And I'm just getting ready to talk about you, man. Where are you going?
I'm leaving.
Okay, fine. All right. So,
I'm going to try to fix your power out of the truck.
oh, okay. I appreciate that. So, oh, it's because I don't have it plugged in.
Yeah.
Ah, smart guy. So I always think about it from a physical, chemical, emotional level. And so always, I've loved biochemistry. When I realized that I was sitting there daydreaming about people's physiology and their insulin resistance and their cells as I'm doing some technique on them from a skeletal standpoint physically, I was like, okay, I need more. This is not good. I'm daydreaming about their physiology and what's going on and nothing I could do anything about. And so with that said, I've had those two components. I don't want to say master by any means because I always stay a beginner. You can become an expert and know more and more about less and less until you know everything about nothing. That's what a PhD is. But for me, it's staying a beginner, staying curious, because when you do that, you put your ego aside. You're open to new ideas. You're open to what can be, because again, for 84 years, no one ever broke the 4-minute mile. For 86 years, no one broke the 4-minute miles. And then someone finally did it, and within 3 months, tons of people did it. And now someone just went sub, I forget what it was, just recently. And now 3 more people have broken that in the subsequent weeks. So again, you can't just put limits on ourselves and what we think about from that perspective. So ultimately, we had a mutual acquaintance, actually a great person, great friend, so more than an acquaintance. But Tim and I were connected, and this is what it was like for me. When I met Tim, it was you complete me, man. So, and that's from the mind standpoint of how do we look with emotions? Because again, if you think of the thought of fear, fear creates a chemical change in your body that will lead to heart rate to go up, blood pressure to go up. You're not sick, but it was just a thought of fear. Just like when you're driving down the highway and you're speeding and you see the cop car, right? And that's a thought process that created a physical manifestation. And so I was looking for something that was beyond just talk therapy, because sometimes the brain will work in a way when you have such a trauma that your body will go compartmentalize and put something away, decrease blood flow to that area. And so since I do true hyperbaric oxygen chambers in my office, we can go up to 3 atmospheres of pressure. I only go to 2.3 at most to avoid oxygen toxicity. But typically 2 is our protocol. But around session 10 is usually about the time that we tell people, be prepared. If you have unlocked trauma, you've had something that you've been hiding in the past, and so it's going to come forth. You're going to have more vivid dreams, those types of things. And because you're oxygenating the brain into these areas where it's kind of locked it off, there's less energy there. The body's not establishing that. So now you got all these wired pathways and these compensatory mechanisms because they never dealt with this neurological issue in the first place. No different than you create a baseball swing and they get the muscle memory. You get this neurological memory, and so people are blocking this. And so we had 8, we could run 8 people a day because we like a work-life balance. So we run 8 people a day. We have 2 chambers. And I remember it was like day 10 of everybody's sessions, and I got a nursing message says, we need more Kleenex. And I go, what happened? She goes, literally 7 of 8 people have cried today. And it was just like clockwork. It was crazy. But again, you're saturating the brain with 100% oxygen. When you do that, you make more ATP. The more ATP you get, the more energy that you get. And so I was looking for something, another piece of beyond just talk therapy because of that, because we can wall things off, we can mask things, we can say what we want, we can manipulate, and look at that. And so from that capacity, when I met Tim and started realizing, everything from the brain training and the heart rate variability and the breathing and getting into SMR and having that sensory motor rhythm, it's a game changer for me because we get to rewire it and help people continue to advance. Because anxiety, they don't have anxiety because they got a Xanax deficiency, right? Can we all agree on that? There's a reason here. And so we have to really go back to the basics. And so, I started doing it myself. So I typically have run pretty hot under the hood, if you speak, so to speak, where I'm running really high RPMs. And I think probably Tim, when he first saw me, we're sitting there having a conversation and my legs just constantly bumping. I'd watch TV at night, my legs constantly going because my brain's also going. So my body's just like, all right, so I'm always constantly working, never thinking about anything else. And then I'm not there. I may be sitting next to my wife, but not in the moment because I got many rabbits in my brain that I'm trying to catch, but you can only catch one rabbit at a time, right? So sometimes they run around in a circle like I am now. But nonetheless, ultimately, I've got a timeline here from when I was born to the end. And it's that hash in between of what I do in this time to make an impact in other people's lives. And so for me, I can't walk into my office being 340 pounds, overweight, eating ding-dongs and ho-hos and drinking on a Diet Coke in front of my patient, expecting them to get well. And, tell them to smoke, but yet I'm smoking. Talk about being a hypocrite. So I practice what I preach. And in that aspect of it, realizing that my life, it's all great things, but it's very scheduled. But yet I leave time. I've learned to compartmentalize and get that work-life balance. So ultimately what it was for me, because physicians get burned out, med students get burned out, I'm too busy not to do it. So people talk about time, Inner Armor. 7 minutes, people. 7 minutes is all it takes. That's not a big deal. I mean, it took you 7 minutes to get your coffee ready in the morning if you make it yourself typically. Unless you got one of those auto brewers or something, or you walk into Starbucks and they got it all made. All right, you get the point. It's not that much time. And 7 hours of my day to do that, for me to continue to rewire my chihuahua-ness that's in my brain. And I apologize ahead of time. My brain sometimes does move like a Mac with my mouth moving like a PC, so I might stutter a little bit here and there. So let's move forward. When a battery loses its charge, we say it's what? It's dead, right? So therefore, if the battery has no charge, it's a dead battery. And when it comes to that, if it has a charge, it can stimulate other things and get work. It has potential energy, that type of thing, right? So let's dive back to the very beginning. If we go, and what I want to do is kind of walk you through this process here. So a battery is dead, we consider it dead. When the human body is dead, is it still making energy? No, okay? Would we all say that light is a form of energy, right? So light is a form of energy. So here's the very interesting thing. Anybody know what this is right here?
Fertilized egg.
What's that?
Fertilized egg, embryo.
100%. When the sperm hits the egg, there is a flash of light called the zinc spark. A flash of light. So in the very beginning, that is at that moment, energy never dies, it only changes form, correct? So it's changing form here, and at that moment, we are now becoming this self-healing, self-regulating system that's starting to replicate and divide to become this human being, to become what you are. So in the moment of that flash of light, to me, that's when life begins, because it's a self-healing, self-regulating system, right? Speaking of which, I always tell my children that they are my favorite gametes. But anyways, but I find it interesting that the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world, is a pretty interesting thought concept there. So ultimately, one disease may be caused by many factors, and one factor may cause many diseases. And why do I put dis-ease? Because it's creating dysfunction, which makes people feel uncomfortable. So why does HRV matter? Why does it matter to the athletes? They need to be able to adapt. They have to have control of their autonomic nervous system. HRV is not just an R to R interval. It's the ability to adapt. For a quarterback to get up underneath the quarterback, or to get up underneath the center, some might get underneath the tackle once in a while, but so they get up underneath there, right? They have to, at that moment, boom, now they're in a sympathetic dominance because they have to be aware, they have precision, they have good reactivity in their muscles and their contractions, and they make good thought choices, and they're narrowed in, very focused, right? Then when the play is over, a good quarterback will walk off, they're breathing, they're chill, they're relaxed. Where the other guys that are all amped up and blah, 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 and they're all, and it's about being able to flip that switch of boom, now it's game on, right? That's what HRV allows them to do. If they are training, that's what they are training for when they are doing this, is that adaptability. So it allows them to have better recovery time, faster reaction times when they go back out there. So high HRV is going to reduce the risk because they have that adaptability that they can go back and forth. So let's go back to my analogy of my guy that was sitting here and before the game like this for 4 hours, right? He is in such a sympathetic dominance. The body's not made for that. If we look at our bodies, we are so parasympathetic. That's the way our body is wired. But that's not our reality. Our reality is that we're a stress ball running around, and then we're adding more physical stressors, and then you hear of the overtraining syndrome, and then these athletes are getting injured. And this is something that we can prevent. We can prevent this. And so how does it relate to an ACL tear? Well, just think about that. If they are in a sympathetic dominant overdrive consistently, you actually lose your reaction time. So let me ask you, when someone, what's the structure of the ACL? What's it supposed to do? What's its function? It prevents translocation of the tibia, right? Of anterior. So when an athlete, so these non-contact injuries that are happening, they've had poor night's sleep, they eat like crap, they're amped up on these stimulants to keep them going because they're not getting good sleep because they're in the sympathetic dominance. They got school to worry about, they got nil money to worry about, they got their family and other dynamics to worry about, that they're getting bombarded with this. So now this athlete has this non-contact injury. It didn't just happen because they had a weak ACL. The ACL is never meant to take that shearing by itself. It's the hamstrings firing. If the hamstrings don't fire, then that's going to happen, which is why we have the reoccurrence rate of about 15% of people, 5 to 15%, depending upon what study that you read, of ACLs re-tearing after repair. Why? Because all we do is say, hey, not you all, but a lot of people are just like, oh, let's just get your flexion extension back. As long as you get your quads going. Well, they were quad dominant in the first place. That led to the injury because their hamstrings weren't firing because we don't spend enough time on the extensions because we're sitting in chairs all day long. Nonetheless. So let's think about this. These athletes, they've got mental, emotional stressors. They got chemical stressors. So if they're not feeding their body, we've got to look at what are the matrix that our body needs to thrive. Vitamins, minerals, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, all those come from food, water, and oxygen. So stand up for me. Slump forward. Shoulders rounded forward, just like Eeyore. All right? Now take a big, deep breath the best you can. Okay? Now stand up with your arms out like this. And now take a big belly, deep breath in. You feel that tidal volume, that increased expansion into your chest, verse like this? So function follows structure. So you guys can go ahead and have a seat there. So why would we want to take an athlete that's already in a physical, and so when I coached football too, I would tell my athletes, I was like, no, get up. Because they come back to the huddle, they're like this. This is a protective mechanism. This is a fight or flight response. Our body is into this position where this is like basking in the sun, right? It's parasympathetic dominant. When you're here, you're only able to take short breaths. If you're only taking short breaths, you're not getting that expansion of oxygen into your lungs deeply, so therefore you're going to be in a constant deprivation of oxygen, which is going to lead to increased lactic acid because you're going into anaerobic metabolism. I won't quiz you guys, but I will quiz the med students on how many ATP we make when it comes to that aspect. But in an anaerobic metabolism, you make 2. All right? When you're in an oxygen-rich environment, for every molecule of sugar that your body has, healthy sugar, let's clarify that, you'll make 36 to 38 ATP. And so our body is very energy dependent, just like we talked about in the very beginning. We're the self-healing, self-regulating system because of ATP. So when we said earlier that a battery, when it has no energy, it is dead. The human body, when it has no energy, we're dead. And what happens when we have no energy? What happens to our muscles? Anybody know the term? Atrophy does happen, but not until the white blood cells start to break down and then it starts to decay everything. Then things become soft. Anybody heard the term rigor mortis? Rigor mortis. So your body becomes very stiff. Why? Because you need ATP to unbind the myosin head from the actin filaments in order for that to happen. That takes ATP, right? So let's take a tight muscle for effect. So a tight muscle is what? Is basically it's in spasm because we don't have enough blood flow. We have lactic acid build up into the area, not enough ATP to unbind the myosin head from the actin filament. Well, what do we need to do? Do you want to make 2 ATP? Or do you want to make 36 and be abundant? So with these athletes, oh, I got cramps, I got this, and because they're not taking care of their foundation. And so when they get back into this position, okay, throw me the ball. And then, okay, they throw them the ball. But the whole time they're running down, they're already in the sympathetic dominance, which they lose their frontal cortex, so they're no longer thinking. They're in a survival mode because their amygdala is on fire. And so now they're running down the field, and they're thinking to themselves, don't drop the ball. Well, as a man thinketh, so he is. So what does he do? He drops the ball because that's what the body hears. You got to have a good mental state, and you can't do that if you're constantly in stress because stress is created by negative emotions. If we're born out of love, for love, then everything else is a learned behavior. Whether it be hate, whether it be fear, whether it be being depressed. I mean, look at Eeyore. I mean look at in people's posture just for that aspect of it. I mean, Eeyore, oh, poo, my tail fell off again. You don't see someone that's like all excited about life walking around like this, do you? No. But what is a depressed state? Depressed state is actually a decreased energy response in the body, in the brain. So it's a depressed state of energy. And so how do we do that? Well, one of the main elements is oxygen. You have to have it. So ultimately, when it comes to pathology, it's all about compensatory mechanisms. So let's take this dude on a treadmill. So this guy is on a treadmill, and he's sitting there, he's running, and what happens? His heart rate goes up, his blood pressure goes up, he starts to sweat. Is he sick? Has he got serotonin syndrome? No. His body's done what? It's adapted to the stressor that he put it under. It doesn't matter whether it's physical, chemical, or emotional stressors. It's going to add to it. So, point being is that we all have a threshold. And so, let's say our cells like to be at a negative 70 millivolts at baseline. If I go up and I punch you in the shoulder, that cell membrane potential now is going to be like negative 20. It's more positive, right? Well, it's injured. It can't heal. Now it's got decreased oxygen because it's got all this inflammation. It's got this swelling to the area. It's going to take a lot longer for that to heal. And we think about things in accumulation because it's not this. We got these high-performance athletes. It's like a Formula One race car. You can't put in 87 octane, expect it to perform at its best. You can't put, low-grade tires, expect it to perform at its best. These athletes are milliseconds away from making a game-changing thing for the rest of their life. And it's either going to make or break them. And so what you do is very important because you have to help them create that foundation. Why it's so important, because all we're going to do is have these neurological compensatory mechanisms, physiological mechanisms, and I can physiology to death because I always had this professor one time, Dr. Prakash, she would say, what is the mechanism? What is the mechanism? And so always in my mind, it's always why. Why? Well, why does that happen? Why does that happen? Which is probably what's led to all the degrees. It's not because I'm some savant and I wanted to be able to have this accreditation. I actually remember being in chiropractic school and Joseph Jancy was an MD, DC, and PhD. I was like, what an idiot. Who the hell would go to school that long, right? Yeah, so be it. But ultimately, it's this dysfunction that goes on for years that lead to pathology. And we need to work more upstream. It doesn't make sense to go down here and sandbag each individual house when the dam is broke. Fix the dam, right? I said hell and dam. I didn't mean dam from that aspect, and hell is a place. So, nonetheless, So again, why HRV? One, it's simple. It's one of the things in performance physiology that is one of the most underestimated things that we can do because of how it works so upstream. So we talk about SMR, sensory motor rhythm, which is basically being in that state where you don't shut down your prefrontal cortex, but yet you're alert and you're awake. Because a sympathetic response, I mean, we're supposed to be just kind of chilling in the garden all of a sudden and see a bear and then we take off and run. And then we get to safety and then we're good to go, right? That's normal. Then we go back into our parasympathetic mode. But we add the physical, chemical, emotional stressors, and going back to our threshold, our baseline is down here. And now we add, let's say they eat like crap. All right, boom. They're here. They only have this much delta before they lose their top and they blow their lid. They go into either pathology or they lose their mind or whatever. This is their threshold for that moment. So you add the biochemical issues because they're not feeding their body what they need. And now you throw in the emotional stressors that they have, and now their threshold is right here. And then they get in and they have an injury that's slowing them down a little bit, and they're like right here. And then those people reach their breaking point. And that's that point where they flip their lid, where they may say something they would never have said before, because now their body is into that stress response, their amygdala is kicking in, they shut down their prefrontal cortex, which is their logical thinking, and now then they go back and go, man, I really wish I wouldn't have done that. I'm sure we've all been there where we got really angry at one point or another, but we all have that threshold. So how do we unlayer that and bring athletes that are here, that are nervous, that are anxious, they left home for the first time, whatever that is, and now they don't have someone over watching their food. Well, athletes probably do. I hope so for the nutritionists in here. How do we get them back down and bring this delta down here? And we have to assess and be able to look and see where people are to find out where they are here, because they're just a ticking time bomb waiting for an injury to happen because their body is, quoting Tim Royer, their body is crying for an injury to say, I'm done, stop this. And then it'll happen and then they slow down, right? So again, what can be measured, can be monitored, can be managed. You don't know what you don't know. And that's the whole key when it comes to Inner Armour and the training and the athletes. And now just think about somebody that has a concussion. Could we have prevented that? Have we looked at their essential fatty acids? Do we know what their essential fatty acids are, which is essential for your brain? They're called essential because we don't make them. We have to get them from an outside source. And if you eat enough fish to get that, you're going to get contaminated in mercury and arsenic and all the other things in our water supply. But I've yet measured somebody that's not already supplementing with it that isn't deficient. Bar none. I mean, 100%. What about B12? You need B12 to make the myelin for your myelin sheath. You need it to make your neurotransmitters. You need folic acid. You need B6. So what are these nutrients that are they there? And what if we can get them back where they don't have this biochemical imbalance and we get their delta down here? And now they got more of leeway where they may hit their head and then boom. Because recently there was a person that hit their head and it didn't look like anything extreme. And you're like, how did that even happen? It's like they barely touched the ground. We're all different individuals and we're all at different states, but how do we optimize to get someone so they all are all the way down here before they reach that threshold? And if they're right here, boom, that concussion is going to happen very quickly and very easily, and then it's going to take a lot longer for them to heal. So think about those things and the modalities and the things that you do as part of this collective team to help serve the athletes in their individual teams. So again, you want to be able to measure these things and monitor it and not just guess. You got to test, don't guess. So you have this great facility. This facility is phenomenal. As I've already said, you guys have amazing resources here. And I really, really encourage you to think outside the box and don't go for just what is. Learn your things that are the basics and the standards of, okay, we're doing this. But then how do you excel that? How do you help that 3%? So you guys are already working with an elite group of athletes. You know, what percent of it, it's a single digit number of athletes that are high school athletes that become college athletes, and an even more smaller percentage that become a professional athlete. So how do we help them reach that goal and have that resiliency that they can be like Rocky and keep getting hit but keep getting back up and keep going? So when it comes to heart rate variability, as I already mentioned, it's the R to R interval and looking at that. But more importantly is that adaptation. And so how can the body respond? So when someone has a high HRV, they're more parasympathetic, which is what our body wants to be at baseline. When their HRV is low, they're more sympathetic dominant. And again, the sympathetic dominance, it becomes a wired program in them. So to people that are anxious, that is a wired behavior. People that have a phobia, how do we do that with clinical psychology? Desensitization, slow exposures over time, letting them know it's safe, it's okay. And that's a great technique. But my point is that they're slowly unwiring that process that's there by getting in, okay, I'm okay, and then I'll breathe, and then you're good. And then all of a sudden something happens, and they retreat right back because they haven't built that resiliency yet to be able to handle it enough. And then they kind of go back and they hide again. But that low HRV gives you that ability to look at, are these patients or these athletes, are they at risk for having an injury? You know, are they this constant sympathetic dominance? And so you can get a window into them. And the elite athletes are the ones that have high HRVs. Because the HRV, when you take that deep diaphragmatic breath that we did earlier, you're decreasing, just even think about this physiology. In that moment, you're decreasing the intrathoracic pressure. When you do that, you're increasing your preload, which is the return of blood flow to the heart. You're increasing that amount because now the heart expands more because there's less pressure in there. And now you increase that. You increase the blood, you increase what gets exposed to the oxygen that you just breathed in with a nice deep breath. You increase your tidal volume, so now you have more oxygen. You get more red blood cells to carry it, and then it pumps back out and it goes right back and dumps into the heart in that diastolic response, and then it goes back through the entire body. And so now you're getting that, but you're also, not only that, and it's funny because I always hear people say, stimulate the vagus nerve. We actually have two, so it's vagus nerves. One of them is getting really ditched because people never talk about them. But there are two vagus nerves. Runs down the backside of the intrathoracic cage, right next to the spine and the posterior aspect of your lung fields. And that vagus nerve, I'll ask students a lot of times, I'll say, you know, is the heart wired to the nervous system? Yes. Is that how it runs? Typical answer is yes. Well, the vagus nerve will help tone that down and give that calming response. But then my question is to people, I say, well, how come when we do a heart transplant, we don't rewire any nerves because we don't know how to do it, but yet it still works? Because the heart can work on its own. It can beat independently without the nervous system, which is crazy. But again, how do we tell on a slide the difference between in histology, when we're looking at a myocyte, a cardiac site, a cardiac cell versus skeletal muscle, is the amount of mitochondria and the intercalated discs that are in there as well. But we're looking at the mitochondria. Mitochondria are your powerhouse that make the ATP, that make the 36 to 38 ATP, depending upon counting the FADHs and things like that, when oxygen is present in ample amounts. So now these people get into the sympathetic dominance, which does what? When you do that, you have low oxygen. If you're in anaerobic metabolism, what's the metabolite you create? It's what your athletes get when they work out and they get that burning sensation. Lactic acid, right? So now you got lactic acid. Acid is acidic. Our body likes to be a base at baseline. So we talked about parasympathetic is where the state our body is naturally designed to be in. We're not designed to have all these physical, chemical, emotional stressors that we have. So our body is naturally designed to be in a parasympathetic state and more basic. 7.3 to 7.4 is our normal pH. If you're 6.8, you're dead or in a coma. So it's a very tight window. 7.2 on a pH dysregulates. All your enzymes don't work appropriately. Your body, so now you've got this lactic acid buildup. You create a lactic acid environment. Your blood vessels start to constrict. You decrease your blood flow to the area. You're decreasing your oxygen even more. And what happens? Do you make more or less lactic acid? You make more, right? And then if you make more, it's this big snowball effect. So what are we trying to do when we rub out a cramp? We're trying to increase blood flow, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get blood flow. So no matter what technique you do, if someone's got a tight muscle, they have decreased blood flow to that area with the buildup of lactic acid, which is like when some people get a deep massage, they're like really sore the next day because they're squeezing all that out. So again, there's physiology behind that, and there's even more that go into that, because then you can talk about Golgi tendon apparatuses and all that aspect. But again, in HRV, when someone is sympathetic dominant, their Golgi tendon apparatuses are not working appropriately to be able to respond appropriately. So typically, if I'm standing at the top of my garage and I tell my son, hey, catch this cinder block, he's going to catch it, and then boom, once it hits his hand, he's kind of in a calm state. He's just kind of chilling there. Okay, Dad, I'll do what you say. This would be a very dumb experiment, by the way. But all of a sudden, his hands will give way because that Golgi tendon apparatus will fire, will give an assessment to the brain and say, dude, this load is too high, the acceleration is too much, boom, and it gives away, and that's it. Has a quick response time. However, when you're in a sympathetic dominant, and just think about the people that are weight training and they get themselves all hyped up and you're like, and they do it and they got 500 and some pounds, they're going to break a world record, and then they tear their pec. Right? They overrode that. They were so sympathetic dominant, the body didn't give way and they pushed through it and they basically just tore their muscle because they weren't in a state of SMR that their body can still function but yet be alert and make logical decisions. And so that's how these non-contact injuries happen. So I think we talked about this, but the whole goal here is for the athletes to be adaptable and get them out of that sympathetic to get them parasympathetic. And it's not just rest and digest and decrease heart rate with increased heart rate variability. There's so much more into these that we just don't have time to go into. It's already 11:01. How about that? I don't know what slide I'm on. Okay. Well, we talked about that. Let's see. Yeah. So if you have someone that is, you've assessed them and their heart rate variability, you really, God bless you, you really don't want to push them to that limit because, again, that's when injuries are going to occur. So you can use this as a window into their physiology because the brain kind of runs everything, right? It's sensing our environment. That's really what the nervous system does. It senses your environment on a physical, chemical, emotional level. So they could tolerate higher loads when they have, because again, as I was just giving that description there. So risk of CNS fatigue and overtraining when you have low HRV, and overtraining increases the risk and poor gains. So again, when you have HRV, you have better lung capacity, better VO2 max. So you can look at VO2 maxes and you can check those things and check their lactic acid threshold and have all these tests. But if you don't start with the fundamental things, which is for them to be able to breathe before they're going in for a test, they have to be able to get themselves calm. Because if you go in there and going through all the schooling that I've gone to, there's been those moments where you're a deer in headlights, where you get called out by somebody right in front of you and you're in front of all your peers and you know the answer, but they ask you and all of a sudden your heart skips a beat, and your stomach, you get a pit in your stomach, and you're like, and then all of a sudden you're that complete deer in headlights. But your athletes have to do that too. They have to be able to get into that state because that's going to get them one less stress off their body, bring their threshold back down to here so they have better resiliency that they can go before they reach that threshold where injury is going to come in. Or poor performance. Because those people that focus so much and they feel all this external stress, I got to perform because so-and-so is here today or whatever, and they put all this stress on them without just going out and doing their thing, it's going to be a crap show. That's the way it is. You've seen it. I'm sure you guys have seen it with your athletes. I know I've seen it. So when it comes to it, so again, that is just a way to rewire the nervous system, and it's very important, but you can't undo the aspect with regards to nutrition. Because again, the five of the 7 things I talked about that our body needs, vitamins, minerals, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and water, and oxygen, all come from food. And so I'm sorry, the frankenfoods, this is real food. These are foods that man did not create, but all the things that are coming in a package are what I call the frankenfoods. And those foods, basically at a molecular level, they got a bunch of chemicals, like a Twinkie that has chemicals in it that could sit on a shelf for 6 years without molding. That's not natural, right? So at a microscopic level, yes, it's adding sugar, but you're getting high caloric intake with low nutrients. So the people are getting nutrient deprived of what they need. And so your body has to take all those chemicals, digest those chemicals, go to the liver, waste energy to get that out of the system. And so every bite that they take is giving information. It's either information of inflammation and nutrient deficiency and adding stressors to the system, or it's food that is feeding their body. You look at somebody like Tom Brady, Kirk Cousins, those are people that have longevity in the game because they care for themselves on all aspects of their body. And that allows them to perform even better. And that's the important thing. So you can't discredit food. So let's just take again omega-3 fatty acids. So many people are so deficient in omega-3 fatty acids, they're dominant in omega-6s, and that goes down a cascade that's going to increase their arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is a pro-inflammatory chemical in the body. So if they're already at baseline and now they get a concussion, imagine what that's going to be like for their brain. Their brain needs DHEA, which is an omega-3 fatty acid. It needs that in order for the brain tissue to repair. But if they're deficient and they're not getting it into their diet, then that's going to be a problem, and it's going to take longer for them to heal because we're all different individuals, right? You know, I remember the first time that I ever, for about 6 months of my life when I was in college, I never drank alcohol at all through high school or anything like that. And I had a 6-month stint where I was like, oh, okay, I'll see what it does. Coming from a family of alcoholics, sounds like a good idea, right? No, was not a good idea. But, you know, I could have 2 drinks and be really, really good. And then I had a buddy that was like, you know, 115 pounds, I could drink a case of beer. That's a lot of resistance, but, and be fine. But again, our body metabolizes different. So as different as we look on the outside, our physiology is that different on the inside. Yes, we all have a liver. Yes, we all have a heart. But we all have different weaknesses, and you're only as healthy as your weakest link. And that is key. And if it's mental for them, if it's heart rate variability, if it's constantly being stressed, they still have a weakness, and we have to find that on all aspects. So that's just looking at that aspect. And then you got your patients or your athletes that get cramps, you know, because they're dehydrated on the field. Completely makes sense. But you decrease your hydration, you decrease your volume of your blood, and then therefore you decrease your forward motion of blood, you increase the viscosity of your blood, and so now it's more thick, so instead of pushing water through your veins, you're pushing molasses, which makes your heart work harder, your heart rate has to go up in order to get the same cardiac output. Then you increase the resistivity because your body's in sympathetic dominance, and so now the blood pressure is going up, and now the tubes are getting more narrow. You narrow the tube, you increase the resistance. You lengthen the tube, you narrow the resistance. Interesting fact, so for the athletes that, well, I won't even go there, but just it was astonishing to me. The average 152-pound male that's normal body composition, guess how many miles of blood vessels they have? 62,000 or 62,000 miles. 6,200 miles. 62,000 miles. Sorry, enough to go around the Earth 2.5 times. So 62,000 miles of blood vessels, enough to go around the Earth 2.5 times. For every pound of fat, according to Principles of Tora, Anatomy and Physiology textbook, he says that for every pound or every kilogram of body fat, you have 400 miles of blood vessels. So a kilogram is 2.2 pounds, so that basically translates to every 1.1 pounds of body fat someone has, you have 200 miles of blood vessels. Again, if you lengthen that tube, you increase the resistance. So again, that's when people have obesity and metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance, and typically why they end up getting high blood pressure, because there's also a component of fluid dynamics, and that's just physics. If you narrow the tube, if I have a garden hose and it's a foot long and wide like that, I could blow water through it pretty easily. But now if I have a 10-foot coffee straw, it's a lot harder. I have to increase that pressure. So again, you got to think about these things with your athletes, that everything has a mechanism and a reason, but I don't know how I got down that rabbit. Sorry about that. So magnesium, it supports the nervous system. Why? If we look at this, let me go back to the electrolytes really quick. So again, we are this energetic being. So I remember going back into chemistry class, and we would do this test with the light bulb. And we would put the electrical conductors there. So basically, if you're in a bathtub with distilled water and you throw a hairdryer in it plugged in, you're not going to electrocute. I wouldn't experiment with that. I'm not advocating for you guys to go home and try this. But in reality, there's nothing to carry that electrical charge, right? But then you start adding salt in here, and the light bulb starts to light up, because now it's carrying that charge. And again, as we established in the very beginning, we are an energy being based off of ATP as our energy currency, and we have to do things to maximize that. Electrolytes are very important. When we have low electrolytes, we increase our electrical resistance, and then which decreases our energy output, so to speak. And our cell membranes, to that point of the essential fatty acids. So anybody ever seen Back to the Future? Okay, you guys remember the flux capacitor? Right? So I think it was Back to the Future 2. What does he do to make the flux capacitor work? He puts a food processor on it, right? And he adds in their vegetables and things in there to get that, right? I look at these things and I just kind of laugh. And then also, if you go back to WALL-E, the only thing that you see in the movie of WALL-E that shows anything that has any color is the Twinkie that's still alive like 50,000 years later. But anyways, you look here, so a capacitor stores an electrical charge. You have 2 dielectric plates. All right? Well, what else is 2 dielectric plates? The cell membrane of our 100 trillion cells is a dielectric plate made up of phospholipids, which you have to have. And if you have a bunch of trans fatty acids, because all you're eating is French fries from McDonald's and stuff and getting these fried food, and you're eating all these seed oils because everything you eat comes in a package and it's what's stable, you're going to have a bunch of trans fats. And this is anatomically the cis form, and which allows good fluid motion, allow these receptors to float around the cell membrane all the way around for better information. But when you get trans fats, they get kinked. and then they hit each other, and there's no fluid membrane around that, so that cell is no longer fluid, and you start to get resistance to signals coming into that cell membrane. So again, that's just one other aspect, but you have to be able to store that charge at negative 70 millivolts that I talked about at baseline. This is how it happens, people, and it's the electrons moving in and out. But what do we have? We have the sodium-potassium pump. What does that take to run? ATP. Where do we get ATP? From our mitochondria. And we can do it in a good way with oxygen present through our breathing, stimulating our vagal nerve, getting in a nice deep breath, increasing our tidal volume, increasing our cardiac output that is more oxygenated. Or we could do it in a sympathetic dominant where we're making 2 ATP. Very inefficient. That's the importance of it because it's all connected. And that's my hope, is that you understand that all of this is connected. We can't take and just segment one thing. You just can't take an athlete and just rehab their one hamstring. Sorry about that. And you have to look at the whole picture and what created that predisposition in the first place. Was it the fact that their ankle mortise joint wasn't moving? I used to work with a lot of Olympic runners, and I would watch them. They're like, "Doc," they come to the side and they're like, "My knee's hitting every hurdle." And it's just like, I don't understand what's going on. And I'll watch their gait or whatever, and the ankle mortise joint isn't working because they rolled their ankle the night before, going down the stairs. Fix that pathology, and now boom, they kind of sail. So, but if we didn't do that, it's like driving a car with the alignment off. You can keep replacing the tires, but they're going to keep balding and get a wear pattern, right? It's the same thing. Look at your people's shoes, too. It's all physical, chemical, emotional. So when it comes to magnesium, sodium, so if we talk about, people talk about sodium and high blood pressure, all right? Sodium decreases the parasympathetic response. Magnesium decreases the sympathetic response, which is why magnesium is more of this relaxation one. For the people that are running high anxiety, magnesium threonate, L-threonate, actually crosses the blood-brain barrier that can help with the nervous system from that aspect of it. Potassium stimulates the parasympathetic response. So you decrease here the sympathetic. Potassium stimulates the parasympathetic. So overall, you're increasing your parasympathetic output, right? Where if you look at sodium and just eating things that are high in sodium, which are usually your prepackaged foods and things, then that is going to decrease your parasympathetic response, and then calcium stimulates your sympathetic response. Calcium, interesting though, when your cell membrane gets depolarized and gets damaged, calcium typically influxes into that tissue, which is one of the reasons that it becomes more positive. So you can use different things with microcurrent devices and things, and you could pump out negative ions, and you could take like a wand and rub over an area where there's tissue damage, and it'll stick. Why? Because you're pumping out negative ions to an area that's more positive, and the opposites attract, right? And that's why. That's how you can kind of do a search and destroy or body mapping and try to find where injuries are accumulating in the body. But that calcium influx also causes apoptosis and cell death. Did you give me 10 minutes? I don't know. I was ignoring you, Chris. Not yet? Okay, perfect. So HRV, again, is a biomarker of mental resiliency and cognitive flexibility, again, to hit that SMR. But you can measure SMR. We have that ability with looking at the brain waves and not with this big old contraption anymore. You have it with a little single probe now that you can look at these things, which is phenomenal. But if you don't start with the foundation, which is just breathing, just sitting there staring at and working with SMR and trying to just do that while you're still in the sympathetic breathing and chest breathing up in here, doesn't make sense. And if you always hear people, they're like, "Oh, I carry my stress in my neck." Why? Because they're using all their accessory muscles because they're breathing up here. They're trying to pull this in. This response, these accessory muscles, were created when we are running and sprinting to get that extra inhalation because we're not in this parasympathetic. But we stay in this sympathetic dominance lifelong, and it has impacts on us. Sleep. So that's something. So if we look at that, Dr. Royer, we were just talking this morning about how he's measuring some other collegiate athletes, and they're having these D-stats where their oxygen levels going down when they sleep. If you go to OSA, which is obstructive sleep apnea, so a lot of that is patients that I see that are overweight, that are obese. They're waking up with morning headaches. They're waking up with high blood pressure. Why? Because when they're not breathing, they're destatting, their oxygenation is going down. When you go down in oxygen, what happens to your nervous system? Does it become more sympathetic dominant or parasympathetic? Sympathetic, hence the blood pressure. It was an adaptive response. The body says, whoa, we need to increase our cardiac output. We need to increase our blood flow to areas. We got decreased oxygenation to our areas. So the blood pressure goes up, heart rate goes up, and they're waking up in this sympathetic dominance, but yet they're oxygen deprived, which is where their headache is coming from, right? So then what they do, they add their caffeine to it in the morning. And then they just keep fueling that. And then they get stressed. And cortisol, which is one of your stress hormones that's meant to kind of come and go, has like a 6-hour half-life. So let's say you wake up, you're late, your alarm didn't go off, whatever. You're getting everything ready. You get your coffee. You get in your car. And so now you're already rushed, right? So you got that big surge of cortisol. Your body's a sympathetic dominance. Then you're driving and someone honks at you and you're like, what the heck, man? I wasn't even doing anything. And when you do that, you spill your coffee in your lap. Now you got to burn in your lap. You stain your pants. You got to go give a presentation. You look like Billy Madison that peed himself. So when you do that, that adds another stress. And then that adds all day long. By the time you get to noon, you get an unwelcoming email that you start reading that gets your heart rate variability low, your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, but your heart rate variability is down. And so now you add that stress in there. And then you go home and you got to go take care of kids, right? And then you got to take care of your husband, if you're, or whatever, your significant other, and work with that relationship. But you never calm down from the morning. And then you're just like, okay, I just got to go to bed. So you start taking things. People will take everything from THC to CBD to melatonin to all these different things to get them there. Well, you could do some simple belly breathing to decrease that parasympathetic response and tone down that sympathetic dominance. And we can all use this. As I said earlier, I'm too busy not to. Thanks, guys, for coming. Oh, totally get it. So you have that, when you're in that stress state, when you're sleeping, this is the other part that I wanted to mention, is that you're not getting your deep sleep stages. You're not getting your REM stages. And those are the things the athletes need in order for their body to repair. That's when our glymphatic, so let's take these athletes that get concussions. What's your glymphatic system? It's the gutters of your brain that start breaking down and getting rid of that crap out of there. But now if it's inflamed and swollen, and then you don't have that time for that rhythm to start to occur. You're out of your circadian rhythm. And so again, it all fits together. And so just think about your patients, your athletes with the concussions. You need to stimulate their vagal tone. Help with their resonant breathing. Optimize their HRV. Get them breathing, because again, oxygen creates ATP, which helps create repair. So what would the point be for us to sit there and have a bunch of raw material delivered to build a house if I don't have any workers? Wouldn't make sense to have the workers there and no raw material, right? But now if we got the raw material and we have the workers, but the workers have no energy because they eat crap. They're hungover from the night before. They didn't sleep. They got obstructive sleep apnea. Whatever it is. How efficiently are they going to work? Are they going to get this house done in 3 months or 3 years? Same thing with our body. We got to not only deliver the raw materials that the body needs, we need to have the workers there, and the workers need the energy that they need to do that. Our workers are our cells, but they have to have the right environment in order to work. When a fish gets sick, what do? Do we send it to the vet? Do we give it medication? We change the water. We change the environment. An amoeba, a single-celled organism, depends upon its environment in a pond for its delivery of nutrients and the removal of its waste. So, removal of waste. Let's just jump on that bandwagon for a moment. If your athlete is constipated, they're pooping every 4 or 5 days, you are what you eat, but you're also what you don't eliminate. So you got to get rid of that. You got to pee it out, you got to poop it out. So again, the point is, all of it's connected. And if you are in a sympathetic dominant state, if you are getting chased by a bear, are you going to stop to take a crap? No, because that's rest and digest. You got to be in a relaxed state. So many people get anxious. When they get anxious, they get nauseous because you're shutting down the digestive system. They may have just put food in there. So again, this whole thing is a connected web. And so if they're getting chased by a bear, because if you do stop to go to the bathroom, you're going to be that bear's meal, and it's going to defecate you. All right. Anyways, so HRV and performance at Liberty University, you guys have an immense advantage over other schools. You guys have an opportunity that is unleashed. I mean, the resources you guys have here, the top caliber of athletes that you guys have, the minds that you have, and the access to people to create programs beyond your basics. Don't do what everybody else does. Raise your standard, not only for you, but for the people that you get to serve. So final takeaways, again, it's the most powerful tool that's underutilized in athletic performance. And so with that, use it. It's a multidisciplinary approach. Stay a beginner, become an expert in what you do and what that is, and over time it might be many tools around your tool belt of what you become an expert in. But why? Because you're staying a beginner. You're continuously learning. Because again, if you let ego get in the way and you think you're the expert, you're not open to anything else. And let me just tell you, when I went through med school and went through residency, I had 2 people that encouraged me. I went back at 36 with 3 kids. That was crazy. I don't recommend it for anybody. I'm glad that I did it. It was my journey. It's part of my story. But I only had 2 people that were encouraging. They're like, I won't even let my kids go into this. And I'm like, how can you not? Like, how can you not get excited about it? The technological revolution that we have going on, the way that we can crunch data now that the human mind can't even comprehend, and then the biological revolution, we blend those things together, we have unlimited capabilities to change the world and change how athletes perform. And you guys, and that can start here. It doesn't have to be someone else. Why let it be a Harvard or a Stanford? Why not let it be Liberty University and what you guys do? It is important. It is only the way that we progress. So with that, I had started early on trying to create a platform for education to educate people because I had a lot of, in a former aspect backing up, I used to have this entire consulting aspect where I would train physicians on nutrition and things of that nature. But then I went into, and that was just with my chiropractic degree. And then I went into med school and residency, and so kind of took a 10-year break, right? So it was a little bit of a haul of doing that. So I have a whole website that's Bentley MD, which is kind of my education wing, but I really am blending faith and healing and everything together because it all interrelates. So if you scan that QR code, it gives you an opportunity to put your name in there. And if there's something that you want to learn about, I love teaching. I absolutely just love providing nuggets to people. There's a lot of things that I can talk on because I asked, do I need a PowerPoint? Because I could just get up and talk. And I did lecture one time that I gave a seminar. Oh, let me back up. The QR code, it gives you that opportunity, and you can actually put in there if there's something that you want to learn about, questions or anything like that, feel free. But that's the QR code. You can do that, and that will give you access. And whenever I publish anything, I'll send you an email, that type of thing. But what you guys do, because what I want to do is help people what they're not understanding. I can get up and talk on it, but if I'm already just talking to what you already know, it makes no point, right? So with that said, there was one time I gave a seminar in Louisville, Kentucky, and my wife and I, the kids were young at that point, and we had a rule that if I'm on the road and she calls, if I don't answer the first time, but it's important, she needs me, she calls right back. And I was like, okay, if she's just calling to say, hey, what's up, honey, that type of thing, it was just one phone call, and then she's like, hey, just call me back whenever, no big deal. So I'm lecturing, I tell the whole crowd this, probably about 170 doctors or whatever that I was teaching that day, and realizing all of a sudden my phone is going off. And I'm like, hey guys, I'm sorry, this is that opportunity. I think my wife is calling me. Something's probably up with the kids. It's only important when I do that, so just give me 1 minute. I pick it up. It was the cameraman in the back with text messages saying, have to pee, have to pee, have to pee. I had no idea I had gone for 2.5 hours, so I simply go, anybody want a bathroom break? The whole room raised their hand. It was hilarious. So with that, I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I'm happy to answer questions. I hope this was useful. I always say my thing is, if you learned one thing, it was well worth your time. When I go to a seminar, sometimes I'm like, I know this already, but I'm there because, again, there's going to be something I don't know. And it might be 20 years from now when you take that. And that was the approach I always took when I studied, which is why, because I would create an emotional response. Because if you just take this linear fashion thinking, which is why PowerPoint's good for me because I'm a lateral thinker and things go all around because it all connects. So this allows for people that are very linear. But when you create an emotion with something, so I think going back through med school, already being a healthcare provider at some level and thinking of other things that some of these people that I've already worked on that I didn't really understand what osteosarcoma was or any of these different things from a medical standpoint, I could go back and tie that, and now I created an emotion with it as well as my logical thinking, which just kind of embeds into my brain. But anyways, I don't even know where that rabbit came from. So I guess for me, I just want to thank you very much for letting me be here today, and I'm blessed to be here by you guys, and I'm just very grateful. So if you guys have questions or anything, feel free to ask me. I'll try not to give a dissertation on some physiological mechanism on your question. So with that, I am grateful. Thank you. Any questions that are pressing? There's no dumb questions, and I'm not of an ego that would say, I don't know that answer. So.
I got a question.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the vagus nerve, is there a component of the diaphragmatic breathing that would activate that
Yeah, it is the diaphragmatic breathing that stimulates.
And can you explain how that works?
So part of it also, part of it comes from a stretch response. From my understanding, is how that triggers that nerve to depolarize and get that transduction of that nerve signal to go up to the brain. And if you think about it from even osteopathic standpoints, for anybody that does OMM or have been exposed to it, you think of cranial sacral thing. That's what you really put, that's one of the mainstays of OMM. And the cranial sacral part is more the parasympathetic aspect, where the sympathetic chain is throughout the thoracic spines and into that area. So, but when you take that vagus nerve runs all the way down to posterior aspect, you're also taking that deep breath, so then you get some external stimulus. No different if I go up there and flick your ulnar nerve. We're going to get a depolarization from that aspect of it, right? So, but you can hit it from different angles, because you can have what's called the double crush syndrome. So someone can have like carpal tunnel, and they can also have cubital tunnel syndrome, and then or they can have thoracic outlet syndrome, putting pressure on the C8 and T1 nerve root going down, creating the symptomatology. But it then makes it more sensitive here. So you can have different things. So you think about, as you take that deep breath, you're expanding the lungs. It's going to press up against that posterior wall of the cage, of the thoracic cage, as well as the ribs are going to move, and they're going to elevate, and that fascial connection is going to increase that aspect, which is actually interesting if you think about fascia, because fascia actually creates electrical energy too. So if you have fascial adhesions due to scar tissue, it's not just about scar tissue. You have to break up that scar tissue so you have better mobility, so it can increase energy to that area and blood flow. But going back to the lungs, sorry about that, going back to the lungs expanding, and then that diaphragm pulls down. So ultimately you're decreasing that intrathoracic pressure, but you're expanding, which is expanding the lungs. Now they fill up with air, because the air pressure is more, so now it fills into the lungs, and the diaphragm pulls it down, and that is pulling onto the vagus nerve as well. And so that's what creates that whole thing. So you can find a we have what's called a respiratory gallop on physical exam, which is a normal finding in people that are very well trained, or even young children, where you listen to their heart and it's like, ooh, they get this quick uptick, right? Well, it's because when they breathe in, that diaphragmatic breath pulls in, and that preload of the blood comes back to the heart, and you get pressure sensors in there as well. So then that causes the heart to say, hey, we got a bunch of blood now, let's pump it out. And so someone that's very well trained, you can also get that, like sometimes I've heard it where it was like so quick and responsive. I was like, oh, did they have an arrhythmia? So then I'll listen again, and then you pay attention, you time it with their breathing, and you're like, oh no, they're just very well conditioned. So I hope that answers. I'm sure there are other mechanisms that we know and don't know, but from my knowledge aspect of it, it's more that depolarization occurs because of the stimulation of that vagus nerve coming down. And you're not going to get it doing this, right? So every little kid, they would always stand up, and they'd be bending over. I was like, no, put your hands up like this, walk around. And this is before I even knew you. But I just knew the physiological principles that are there. And if they do that, I mean, when someone wants to hyperventilate and pass out, what position are they in? They do that, and then, okay, we all have Jerry Springer, right, in our family. My brother used to he'd have me bend over like this, breathe really, really heavy, and he'd say, okay, now hold your breath. And then he'd pick me up, and then he'd, increase the blood in my brain, and then I'd just go out. And then I wake up, oh, what happened? It was a fun experiment, let me tell you. Yeah. So don't recommend doing that either, but that's what's going to happen. And then they get lightheaded, your athletes when they're breathing that aspect of it. So, and then it increases their sympathetic response, and they're like, oh my gosh, let's have them breathe into a bag. And then I won't get into that physiology of why that works, but they're going to put their body into that overstimulation, that overdrive, and they're past that threshold. So just even posture is huge, but having that good diaphragmatic breath, bringing that in, but you have to retrain it, because if they're sitting there and they're constantly stressed and breathing, and they're walking and it's all chest breathing, it's a road to going nowhere. I mean, and this is how you create that resiliency and help them reach their goals. And people's goals change, and that's okay, but we're there to support them every step of that way. But we have to look at it from a multidisciplinary integrative approach. There's just not one answer in there. It's not the same protocol for everybody. You take that protocol as your baseline, and then you customize it for the individual, because then it becomes personalized. And so if we could be predictive, we could be preventative. And then we also make it personalized, as opposed to being a protocol. But we do have to have a standard, but then you build on that standard. So we call it the gold standard. Gold standard in medicine is a guideline. It's not an absolute. It's a guideline to use something. And so it kind of gives you an idea, okay, here's my baseline, let me get this, and then you move on with it. From whatever modality aspect that that you work with. Some people just, oh, you need to do this caloric intake, but they're insulin resistant. Well, then if we do that and their caloric intake is coming from carbs, and that's not going to be very good because they got insulin resistance, so we need to switch that. Or, maybe they get, hyperlipidemia because they got a dyslipidemia condition where their body doesn't, store body fat. And so, well, that wouldn't really be good for them to anyways, I'll stop. What other questions?
I had one. I think it's intuitive to me that, by maybe decreasing that sort of that threshold before you cross over into sympathetic drive, that kind of before you go into training or lifting or something like that, that makes sense. To me, it would seem almost like a separate skill to be able to pull yourself back in the middle of performance from kind of a sympathetic state back into a parasympathetic state. Do you think you need to train that differently, or how can we manage that sort of on-field flip?
Yeah, so the on-field flip is one, having that technique and knowing how to have that breath, and then actively thinking about it. For them to have a TPS on their finger or reading their brain waves, probably not the most logical thing right in the middle of a game. But you have to rewire that pathway, and then it almost just becomes second nature, because we still have, just because they're in a stadium with thousands of people staring at them, the body's still responding to the same stressors of the physical, chemical, emotional. So if we break down that barrier outside the field and we retrain that body, it's naturally going to step into that on the field. That they can be in the middle of a play, all sympathetic dominance, to be able to, boom, turn it off, be chill, let's go back to the huddle, not wasting any energy, getting good deep breaths in there, oxygenating my body, increasing my ATP immediately, so then I can get back underneath, and then boom, here we are. And now let's turn it back on. And it's that flip. And that's what makes that difference in non-contact injuries to their ability to think cognitively, that have that SMR. There's great studies showing that SMR, that sensory motor response, really fun, interesting fact of how it got there with hydrazine and astronauts in the 1960s. But real quick, these astronauts were passing out to this hydrazine, and they would pass out and have seizures. And there was, I forget the doctor's name, but he was training cats with a reward system, just like Pavlov's dog, but training them for SMR, to be in this alert but yet calm state, right? So what they did is then they exposed a bunch of cats. Cats were harmed in this experiment. I'm very sorry for the activists, but there were cats that were harmed, so they were exposed and they seized. But the ones that were trained in SMR didn't even flinch. Crazy, right? What does that tell you? Their detoxification pathways and things. They got into a calm state. People talk about hypothermia and how you can hypothermia is a mental state of where you're at. So sorry for Jack and Rose, but well, Rose lived, but Jack didn't. Titanic reference for those of you that don't know. So anyways, that SMR, so going back to the original question and training that, you just got to decrease all that aspect, because when you get that vagal tone, that parasympathetic state, you're naturally going to start creating that SMR in the brain. And then we can start to fine tune that even more, where, okay, you can start doing it with different stimuluses. It's interesting that whenever I'm doing it first thing in the morning and I'm doing my brain training, and then my dogs come out of the bedroom and they come jump on me, you see this alarm state that starts going off, and my high betas start flying all the way. And now my screen is dimmed down, my hearing is going down, and my body's trying to correct. So I think it would be interesting to figure out, can we do other stress states? Maybe have someone stand on a Bosu ball while they're working on their balance and proprioception at the same time while working on that, and see what that would be like on the field. Try to simulate things that would just add external stressors once they have their foundation taken care of first. Because if you don't take care of the foundation, everything else is going to be symptom suppression and sandbagging. Let's fix the dam up top, and then we start fine-tuning it even more so. Anyways.
We got to get you up the hill.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Awesome.